Hey guys, this is Mario Kart. I want to make a video for my Brawl porting tutorial. This one's going to be a crash course for people getting into 3ds Max. I'm just going to be showing you guys the user interface and just demonstrate a couple of the tools. I want this to give you a direction to start in, to give you guys a chance to start building your skills so you can later on use those skills to port your models from 3ds Max to Brawl. Okay. So let's get started. Autodesk owns 3ds Max. They do offer a free version of 3ds Max under their educational program, I guess. So you've come to their website. It's students.autodesk.com. Under the Download Center, they offer a lot of different Autodesk softwares, of course, including AutoCAD, but also 3ds Max as well. Okay, the student's license I didn't really read up on, but as far as I know, you're getting a full version of 3ds Max, and the only exception is the end user license agreement, where they basically say you cannot use this for commercial. You have to use it for only educational stuff, like in the classroom or something like that. But yeah, it looks like it's 100% free, and I'm not sure if there's a license expiry. I don't know if it expires after a while, but for sure you're getting way more out of it than you would if you downloaded the trial on the normal version of 3ds Max. So yeah, definitely you can download this thing here. It's free. The only thing is when you try to download it, it'll ask you to make an account with Autodesk. Okay, so that's no biggie. Just make up some information, make a fake name, whatever. Who cares? Anyway, once you're registered, you can download it for free and install that. Okay. Anyway, so carrying on, I will move on to my version of 3ds Max. Where are you? Okay. This is 3ds Max. Okay. My version is a little more different. This is actually the design version. Okay. The only difference is I think the physics bar is missing, but otherwise the layout is exactly the same. 3ds Max has got so many different versions, but they are all identical. All right. Okay, so before I start, I'm just going to bring up this virtual keyboard here. This virtual keyboard is not a part of 3ds Max. It's just to help illustrate in this video what keys I'm pressing. Okay. Hopefully I don't go too fast. You can see the keystrokes, but it's to show you what keys to press. Because 3ds Max is heavily based on hotkeys and stuff, like most applications are. Anyway, so let's get going on this thing. This is the interface. I'm going to go in a circle pattern here, and we'll just cover the various things on here. So starting off, we have the main menu. Main menu, of course, stuff like new file, resetting a file, opening a file, saving a file, and stuff like that. I believe when if you click on something, it gives you a brief description. Maybe not. But anyway, I want to reinforce import and export here. These are different slightly. Import allows you to import data from a different application and bring it into 3ds Max. So it's just a selling point for 3ds Max when they can say, okay, we can handle this software, that software, and this software, and we can all handle it in 3ds Max. So that's good for them and their customers. The thing is, all these formats are licensed to different companies. Okay, some people think they can just take a game off their Xbox, copy the files to their PC, and they can import it and export it through here, which is a misconception. You can only do certain formats. Sorry. So some formats you might be using would probably be the object format or 3ds. Those are the most common on import and export. Just be mindful that you probably won't always have the exact same ability to import than you will export, because again, it's being licensed. So some options won't probably show exactly the same in export. So some formats will be supported in import and not in export. Anyway, so that's the main menu. Next ones are your quick icons. These are new to the newer 3ds Max. You probably won't have these quick icons on the older versions, but these icons give you like quick new file, open file, save a file. And for some reason, your undo and redo are here now. Yeah, the hotkey for undo is Control Z. Okay, that's common, and Control Y for redo. You'll be using that a lot when you're editing, and maybe you did something by accident. You want to go back or forth through what you're doing. All right. Next thing you have is the standard application bar here. It's just a categorized drop down of all the options in 3ds Max. Okay, I'll let you explore these yourself because there's just so many to go through, and I'm sure half of these I don't even know myself. The one I just want to take note of is the customization one. If you click on customize there on the user interface, you'll see that the first tab here is called keyboard, and it has all the hotkeys. Right? I think you can even print off a version here. Right? Yeah, right. The keyboard chart. yeah, if you're confused on what hotkeys are or whatever, you can come into here and figure out what they are. You can also assign new ones and stuff like that. So yeah, all the hotkeys are in there as well. You can customize the other stuff. This is the entire customization of the user interface right here. So you can change that in here. Anyway, so that's that one. The other ones maybe we'll cover in later videos, but not important right now. Okay, so the next one here is your main tools. This is stuff like taking an object and moving it across in the scene or rotating the object and stuff like that. I'll cover that after I get into the navigation part. So we'll just continue over here. This thing here is pretty much all the tools in 3ds Max. They're just jammed into one panel. So everything's kind of compacted in here. Everything in 3ds Max, well, actually everything 3ds Max does is in here. Okay, so this stuff is pretty cool. And I'll get into this in a sec. We'll scroll down here, and in the corner, I don't know if you can see, this here is the navigation controls here. Not that you would use them usually. Usually you just use your scroll wheel, and I'll show you that as well. But these are your basic navigation controls. I'll cover those in a sec. Then over here, across down the bottom, we have the animation slider. The animation slider, of course, is for creating an animation. You create different frames of the moving, and you play back those frames in sequence, and you get animation. We're not going to be doing an animation, but we're going to be using this animation slider to, like once we get our model in, we're going to move our model around to see if there's any joint problems with it bending and whatnot, and we'll be using this animation slider in that process. Okay, and the last thing here is this big center screen. This is what they call the viewports. Okay, so they basically allow you to view objects in your 3D scene. So you get your standard orthographic views, top, front, and side, as well you get your perspective view, of course. Okay, these essentially help you view your objects from all angles, and theoretically should be all you need to create a three-dimensional object. Right. Of course, in today's age, we usually use programs similar to ZBrush, where we have the object in full perspective. We can move it around and reshape it using brushes rather than drawing lines and stuff like that. This is old school, but still, we're going to be using this to port stuff to games. This is more ideal. Anyway, so that's basically the viewer. There's a few things in the viewer that are kind of interesting. If you right-click here, you can actually configure the layout. So right now I have a 4 layout here. You can see the main one here. You can change it like 3 or like 1 or something like that, right? I know Blender, you can split them up however you want, but 3ds Max kind of, you have to set it. Of course, you can move the pane around too if you want. You just grab them, and you can move it around how you want. Okay, you can always right-click and reset it. Okay. What else we got here? Perspective. You can change it to orthographic, change it to a different view, top, bottom, etc. Okay. Put it back on perspective. And then you have this one here where you can change it from smooth, maybe to wireframe, to edge mode. Okay, and I'll create an object and demonstrate that in a sec as well. And this little cube thing here, it's for navigation, but it's new to 3ds Max. It's just something they stole from Maya. It's not really that important for anything. But anyway, and then so you can see the grid here. When I move it, it moves along with the cubes. That's pretty much all it does. All right. And if you right-click, you get this thing called the quad. It's basically a little menu that will change based on what you click here. Right now, you get the basic hide an object, unhide an object, freeze an object. And then when you click on something in your main toolbar, you'll get another thing here of other options. And basically, they just give you a quick link to your features and options and stuff like that. All right, so that's the viewport. All right, let's create an object now. Going to the main toolbar here. The first tab here is called Create. We're probably only going to be dealing with Create and Modify for now. With Create, you can create different types of objects. Of course, you have Geometry, which is just a model. Shapes are things like splines. So if you want to create like maybe a text bubble or something, like draw your name. And of course, you can do that with shapes and stuff, like create a line, stuff like that. Lights they're just kind of like objects that emit light to other objects. All right, so yeah. Cameras are just points or positions where you can view your model at. Right, they're fixed points. And next, helpers. You can just create like these boxes, and they're kind of inert. They're not actually meshes or anything. They're just a point. And later on when you're doing rigging and animation, that would come in handy for that. And the last one is space, not the last one, but space wraps, space warps. These ones are to do with physics and stuff, so that's not too important anyway for what we're doing. Anyway, systems are bones and bipeds. Bones are nice. They're just little sticks that you can use to attach meshes to. Bipeds are pre-built skeletons for you to attach your mesh to. Okay, so when you get into rigging your character, you would create these skeletons. But for Brawl, you're going to be using an imported skeleton. You're not going to create your own skeleton, but it's nice to know where the bones are and stuff. Anyway, so going back here to the geometry, we're just going to create a box. Actually, I'm going to create a plane here first. I don't know if it's kind of difficult to see the grid, but in the viewer here, there's a grid on the perspective view. And I know in this video it's going to be hard to see because the grid's gray. So I'm just going to create this big plane here. I'm just going to turn it white. Okay, so now I'm going to create a box on that thing. So let's go to box, and I'm just going to create here. Oh, by the way, to create an object, you just left click and hold, then you drag, and that creates the, I don't know, I guess like the surface of it. And then when you release and you drag up, you'll create the height of the object. Right. And I don't know why it creates a gross color here, but we're just going to make it pretty. There you go. Nice and pretty. Okay, so let's get into the navigation controls. Oh. Okay, so these are the navigation controls. I'm just going to minimize this so you can see in the center. The first one here that's most important to me is the maximize viewport toggle. This allows me to blow up my current view. So if I just take my scroll wheel and I click on it, it'll highlight a different viewport. And whichever viewport is highlighted, I can blow it up or put it in full screen anyway. So when you're working in perspective, it's nice to blow it up, and you can see more. Okay. Of course, there's the other mode. If you hit Control X, it blows it up even further by hiding the toolbars. Right. Usually, I don't do that because it only gains you like maybe 5% more room, which is kind of stupid. But yeah, it's there. So the hotkey for toggling the viewports is Control. No, actually, it's Alt W. That will full screen your view. And Control X to full screen it. Right. All right. And now we'll get to the main navigation controls here. So your basic ones are obviously going to be zoom, pan, and rotate. Those are very basic to any 3D program. So of course, zoom is this little magnifying glass, in and out, in and out. Okay, just click and drag. Next one is the pan, little hand guy. Okay, pans around your view, and the rotate, they call it orbit. You orbit around your object from various different views. Okay, so obviously it's going to be better to not use the buttons, but rather your mouse. To do that, it's very easy. Scrolling up and down on your mouse will zoom in and out. Okay, holding the scroll wheel down will do your panning. And if you hold the Alt key and you hold down the scroll wheel, it'll do your rotation, your orbiting or rotating around the object. Right. So get used to those navigation controls. That's again scrolling up and down, holding the scroll wheel to pan and rotate. Right. So it's important, once you get those controls understood really well, you'll be able to navigate very freely in 3ds Max and anticipate and find problems with your models and fix them, etc., etc. So navigation is very important. And to tie in navigation, I also want to illustrate the manipulation tools up here. When people first start out, I notice sometimes they use the manipulation tools kind of too freely, and they cause issues with the model. I don't know. Again, I don't know if you can see the grid too well, but let me just draw another plane here. Yeah, it's nice and big. Okay, I'm just doing this to show you the center of the axes. Okay. This is the 0 point. So if I make this object on 0, okay, it's at the center of the grid. Right? Again, there would be another black line. But that's the center of the x-axis. Okay. So you want your object always to be on the center, so half of it, this half is symmetrical to the other half, to the left and the right. All right. I know some people, when they show me their Max scenes, they usually have a box over here, or not a box, but a character model over here, or over there, somewhere random, where it's supposed to be always in the center of your grid. Okay. Always work from the center of your grid. Okay, especially when you're working with character models. You want everything to be symmetrical as possible. All right. So anyway, with this box, we can do some basic things. Right here, I've already used it. It's the moving icon. If I click on that, I get a gizmo here. I don't know if I can make this thing bigger. No. With the gizmo, yeah, I can't make it bigger. With the gizmo, you can move on different axes. This black line help illustrate the grid here. So this gizmo follows along with the grid. So by selecting the green arrow, I can move along the y-axis, or by selecting a different arrow, I move on a different axis. Right. That's what the gizmo does for us. We also have similar gizmo when we're using rotation. Okay, rotation obviously rotates the object, and scale we get a different gizmo. All right. So by selecting different parts of the gizmo, we can scale different axes. So you get the idea. All right. So that's the three main ones there for manipulation. The difference between rotating your object, rotating around your object, is that you're rotating your object permanently on the grid space or in 3D space. So if you rotate it, your object is going to be laying on its face or something, and that's not what you want. So that's why you want to use navigation to look around your model rather than actually moving your model around. Because one of the things I notice people do is their models really distorted or moved around, and they don't actually quite understand why. But it's because they've probably used these tools to inspect their model or look around it, and they didn't actually realize they were making changes to it. Anyway, just wanted to point that out. Okay, so moving along, let me just put this back into the center by going undo. Okay, so there's our object. This one here, this is the reference point. So right now, if you look at my gizmo, it goes in line with the grid, okay, on the axis of the grid. If I change my reference to maybe screen, the gizmo changed there. So now the axis is in alignment with my camera view. So however I'm viewing the object is the way that my gizmo is now. So when I move that, it no longer moves with the grid, it actually moves with my current view. Okay. And you got some other ones there too you can play with. Okay. Usually I leave it on view. The next one is pivot point. This one's pretty cool. If you notice the gizmo is down here, that's because we clicked there and our object was created from the center of that and up. So the point, or the center point, or the pivot point is right there. So when I rotate, you can see when I rotate, it's pivoting from that gizmo. Okay, so we can change the pivot point or the gizmo position by changing this thing here. So if you left click and hold, you'll get more options. This one here is center of the object. So when I rotate, it's rotating from the center of the object. Okay, and let me just move this object across here. And the last one, if I left click and hold, is from the center of the grid. So now when I rotate, it rotates from the center of the grid. So you get the idea. All right. So those come important or handy later on. For example, if I want to mirror this from the left side of the axis to the right side of the axis, I can use mirror and copy it, and it's created an exact copy mirrored on the axis to the other side, and they have the exact same coordinate from this side to the next side. Okay. And going from there, I just want to cover linking and unlinking. Not that you'll be needing it, but it's just something cool to be aware of. You can actually attach this object to that object by creating an invisible link. So if I left click, hold, and drag, if I can drop it onto another object, now that object is basically linked or chained to this object. So when I move it, it moves with it. So that's pretty cool. Of course, selecting this and unlinking it will break that chain. It's invisible. Okay. And this one here, selection filter, that one's really important to know too. There's different types of objects, obviously. So let's create maybe a light, standard light, omni, and maybe some dummies. So these are all different types of objects. Oops. Just put that there. Maybe that there, maybe that there. So if I go into wireframe, which is F3 on the keyboard, all right, F4 is edge mode. See, it highlights the edges. We're going to go into wireframe mode. You can see all the edges of the objects. So I can see, like an X-ray view of all my objects. So I can select a light or a dummy or whatever. The thing is, some objects might be overlapping them. So if I attempt to select that green box or that dummy, I may get interference from another object. Okay, and if I try to move that, I might be moving the wrong object. Okay, so when you're starting out, this can be really frustrating. If you're trying to select something and it's very difficult for you to select the right thing. The selection filter is an aid. It helps you select only things you want to select. So for example, if I change this to geometry, I can only select geometry. Okay. If I change it to lights, I can only select lights. If I select it to dummies, or helpers, sorry, I can only select those dummies there. Those are the helpers. Okay, so that's what the selection filter will do for you. And it'll come more in handy when you're doing rigging with your character. Let's change it back to all. Selection here, you've seen me use it a couple times now. All it does is allow you to select an object, basically. The selection box just shows you a list of all your objects in the scene. So again, this thing has filters. When you enable the filters, you see all of the objects. But you can easily toggle them off, select what you want, click OK, and those objects will be selected. Alright. Next one we got here. Oh, this one controls your selection style. If you left click and drag it across, you create a rectangular selection box. You can change that to maybe a circle or maybe a lasso, depending on what you need. We covered that. Covered this. Snapping, you're not really going to need that. Mirror, that's cool. Layers, you might need that. Say for example, you have a lot of geometry in your scene, and you want to kind of break it up. You can use layers to select stuff, and if you right click, you can say add to a new layer. And now these objects are on that particular layer. You can select them, get rid of them or whatnot, and yeah, so it's just a nice way to organize your scene objects in this layer manager. Of course, you can hide them, freeze them. You can also hide them in your render and stuff like that. So that's nice. All right, and the last one here is the material editor. Material editor is basically going to apply materials to your object. The materials are what you see off of the surface, basically. And the newer 3ds Maxes might have the slate editor. It looks like this. Okay, basically materials have become so complicated in this day and age that it's really hard to manage them. You get a system where you have a bunch of lines and a bunch of textures that go everywhere. So yeah, this thing is just to help you organize your textures and materials as they become more complicated for whatever material application you're using. The slate editor is pretty cool, but I haven't really explored too much with it. I usually use the compact editor. So if you can, just go to modes and go back to compact editor. Right. Compact editor works pretty easily. If you want to retrieve a material, you just have to click on the material dropper, and then you can just click on an object. Of course, these objects don't have a material, so it won't work. Other than that, we have these marbles up here, or spheres that have the different materials applied to them. So we can blow them up. We can look at the different materials applied to the marbles. With these marbles, we can click on them, drag them, and drop them onto different objects. Let me just enable maps on this thing. Just disable that and disable that. So I can apply stuff like bricks and all kinds of cool stuff. Right. That's basically how the material editor works. Otherwise, like I said, if your model had existing textures or materials, you would use the eyedroppers, and you can retrieve them. So I clicked on that, and it's retrieved that material. Okay, I can edit that later on. With this version of 3ds Max, I'm actually preloaded with a bunch of architectural materials. The problem with that is that they're mental ray shaders and materials that are only for 3ds Max, and they won't work well, or probably won't work at all in other programs. So for that, you're going to have to use a standard material. Okay, and only apply standard materials to your objects. That way, it'll be compatible with Brawl. Okay, standard material is pretty basic. You get no fancy bells and whistles, and with Brawl, you'll only be using a diffuse anyway. So to add a texture or something like that, you just click on this little bubble here besides the diffuse, and it'll allow you to add a bitmap. So click on bitmap, and a bitmap is basically a texture. So I'm just going to add this texture for my desktop here. Okay, and now I've assigned a texture to this diffuse. If I want it to show up in my viewport, I have to go to Views, go to Show Materials in Viewport, and go Standard Display with Maps. It'll force on textures on all my materials. You can also force them or toggle them off in the material editor itself. This little icon here says Show Your Map in the viewport. Okay. Anyway, so that shows the texture in the viewport, and I can simply click this marble and drag it to another object. So that's how the material essentially works, or material editor. And yeah, so that's pretty straightforward, but I'll cover more of this later on as we're going through an actual Brawl port. So that's material editor. And moving on, let's see. Okay, this thing here. Now that we've covered the creation tab, we're going to be moving on to the modify tab. Modify allows you to select anything you've created and further make changes to that. Okay, so right now I've created a box. It's not a mesh that I can edit, it's just a box. But I can change the dimensions of it, the length, the width, and the height. But if I wanted to say, for instance, take this vertice and drag it across, or duplicate this face and make another face, I can't do that because it's just a box. It's a shape. Alright, to change it into an editable mesh, I have to right-click and convert it to an editable mesh. The problem is now it's no longer a box, and I can no longer change the dimensions of the object. Alright, so now that it's an editable mesh, I can expand this tree here, and I can edit the vertices. Or I can change, maybe, or edit the edges, or even the faces. Okay, might be better if I go into edge mode. Okay, so you can see the edges there, and so that's how basically the editor works, or the editable mesh works. Okay, so let's put that back a little bit more. It's kind of ugly. Okay, so what this? Okay, so to demonstrate this, I can actually convert this back to a box. If I go to undo. Okay, so I just bring this back to a box by going undo. What I can do is I can actually add a modifier called edit mesh, and as you can see, I get those same options as if I want to convert to. So right now I've achieved the ability to edit my model, alright, while still keeping the box as the base object. So this still allows me to edit dimensions as well as edit the object. So that's the innovative thing about 3ds Max, is that you can add a bunch of modifiers on top of each other, and then at any point you can go to an earlier modifier, for instance the box, and you can change what you had, parameters that you had there before. Alright, so that's the stack modifier, and the modifier list, you can add many different editing tools to your object. Okay, the other one you'll likely be using is unwrap UVW. This one allows you to change the UV layout. A UV layout just maps on how a texture fits on your object. So for instance, I can take a face and I can move it out of the way. You can see that the face has changed for that object. Let's see if I can edit this further. So that's essentially how it works. You can edit, of course, by vertices, edges, and faces. It's pretty simple, or pretty basic, I mean. So yeah, so all the faces are mapped out in this two-dimensional grid, and they tell the, or they map the texture around your object, basically. Right. So that's one we'll be using, and the other one is skin. So for skin, I'm going to illustrate that using a cylinder. All right. So first, let's create a bone chain. Let's go back to our ortho view, Alt W. We're going to go to Systems in our Creation tab, click on Bones. Okay, I'm just going to create a simple bone chain of just 3. To do that, I'm going to left click, drag up, left click again, drag up, and left click again. To terminate, you're going to right click, and just going to leave a little nub there. Okay. So around this bone, I'm going to create an object. So I'm going to go to Geometry and Cylinder. So around this bone, I'm going to create a cylinder. Ooh, wrong way. Okay, let's just make this a little bit higher here. Okay. So to illustrate the importance of edges and skin, the skin modifier, I'm going to add a skin to it. So right now we have a bone here, and the idea is to animate the bones and have our mesh follow with it. To bind the mesh to those bones, we have to add skin. So on your skin modifier, select skin. Right. If we move the bones, you can notice it'll still not work, or it won't be binded to it yet. What you have to do is under skin, go to add bones, and you're going to add all the bones. Let's just filter these out here. Okay, so we're just going to add those 3 bones. And now when we move the bone, you can see that is going to be binded to the mesh, or the mesh is going to be binded to the bones. Okay, so when we do any animation with our bones, we want to enter animation mode. You can see when I was doing anything, I was just moving it and going to undo. But if we want to have this a little more permanent or hold longer, we're going to have to make an animation key. So to do that, move the slider off anywhere other than 0 and enter animation by going into auto. Okay, so now any changes we make, when we exit auto mode and we go back to 0 on the slider, it'll just move the animation back to how everything was originally. Okay, so that's what it's going to be doing for us. Okay, and again, like you just saw, if you grab the wrong thing, it might be easier if you go into selection filter, so you only select bones. Okay, so that makes it a little bit easier for yourself. But I just usually leave it on all. Anyway, so when we go into skin, when we click on it, you notice it enables envelopes, and you might see another gizmo here. What this gizmo does is it allows us to control what vertices are held to this bone. It essentially holds the vertices that are red. So obviously, if the vertices aren't red, that means it has no control over the mesh, or the vertices, sorry. So that's the old school method, which would be you changing the envelopes until you got a better bend. Alright. Of course, right now this is very rigid, and you don't have very much control. You're just able to move this thing up or down or another direction. Alright. To get full control, you want to go into a per vertice editing mode. By doing that, you have to go into edit envelopes, click vertices, and scroll down and go to the weight tool. Okay, so now I can click on an envelope and it'll show me the current influences or vertices assigned to it in red. So I can select maybe vertices that are blank, and I can assign a weight value of 1. And now they will attach that bone 100%. So that basically means 100% represented in red means that when the bone moves, it has 100% influence on that bone. So it would move as if it was glued to that bone. Right? But if it has only 50% influence, that means it's only being pulled 50% by this bone and maybe 50% by a different bone. So if I select this bone down here and I add a weight of 5, you can notice that now instead of going straight with that bone, it's created a gradient or a blend between the two bones. So this is what we do when we create bends. Usually in other tutorials they'll tell you to, between bone joints, you'll just make your vertices orange by pressing on 0.5, and that creates a bend or a blend there between your two joints. So obviously when you animate a joint like an arm, it'll bend a little more properly. Of course, this, if you imagine it being an arm, it doesn't really look that realistic. It actually looks kind of broken. What we can do is we can select a bunch of vertices in that area and press the blend button, and it'll average those weights. Okay. We can also use these manual buttons here to assign a manual weight. So you could even use grow to enhance or grow your selection and just increase the weight or assign a manual weight like 1. Right? And that will help you clean up the weight values. Alright, so that's just something to play around with, and you can experiment with your different bends. Okay, but weighting can only take you so far. You can notice even with blending our weights, we still get a really jagged bend, and that has to do with edge flow. If your edge flow is really bad, your weights aren't going to really matter. If I add more faces or edges, let's see if I can change this. Okay, so more faces, more edges will give you a better bend. Okay, so when you're skinning, there's two things that impact your overall results. The edge flow, for example, if you have a model that's not properly modeled, it's not going to bend very good. Second, how you weight those vertices is also going to matter. Again, you have to do this on a per vertice level, so you have to select a group of them and assign a weight, or use a blend or whatnot to get a more appealing effect. Right. So it's not something that's necessarily that easy. It's not hard, I would say, but it is time consuming because you're fixing things that don't look right or whatever. All right. And again, you can always go back and change stuff in your previous workflow. Oops. Okay, so that is essentially skinning in a nutshell. Again, I'll be covering this more in depth when we're getting into getting a character actually in Brawl, when you can actually see my actual progress. Other than that, I think that's a full explanation of 3ds Max's user interface and just some of the basic functions you can do. Of course, like I said, every modifier you click on will have more options in the rollout here, and as well, if you right-click, you'll get quick options. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind that hotkeys are very important in 3ds Max, and that you need to be familiar with all aspects of 3ds Max to use it effectively. Okay. Hopefully, this gives you a basis to start getting into 3ds Max, and I wish you good luck. Thank you for watching.